This is WBSM On Demand. The time is now to talk about everything happening here on the South Coast and beyond. It's time for South Coast Now with Chris McCarthy. Call into the show at 508-996-0500 or send Chris an app chat message or open line voicemail on the WBSM app. It's the most interactive show on the South Coast. It's South Coast Now.
Good morning. I'm Chris McCarthy, and I have Senator Mark Montigny here in studio with me. We're talking about the state pier, and we out of that state pier conversation came. Now, the Senator and I talk quite a bit off the air, so I know what he's does and has to do up there to win resources for our community. But I know that. Why would you know if you don't know? So I wanted to ask him to stick around and explain a little bit in the context of this project, but it's an example for everything else when we think about it, that between the House and the Senate and the governor, what you have to do to make, in this case, $25 million appear from the state budget specifically for a project in New Bedford.
So, Chris, it's amazingly frustrating. And I would suggest that as a critic of government, it's interesting how difficult it can be when you go in, as I mentioned last time I was here, last week I think it was, that when you are sent by the voters of the South Coast, particularly growing up in New Bedford and knowing who your neighbors and friends, and my campaign was made up of people that I went to grammar school with,
right?
So and others, so they knew the real story, what they were getting. And one of your listeners came up to me the other day in downtown and said, very conservative guy. And said, you're an a-hole, but you're our a-hole. You don't even have to bleep that, right?
No.
And I thought that was interesting because, to me, you go up to Beacon Hill with that same chip on your shoulder that we have here, which to me is a positive. It's like we were lucky to grow up here, but we also feel that we have to fight for the resources there because we're states like Massachusetts where the political capital is also the commercial capital. Mm-hmm. It's a great sucking sound. It's like a vacuum of resources in Boston, and the Boston folks want it all when there's a whole bunch of gateway cities around Massachusetts who need help. So the good news for me, although it's made me fiscally very conservative, which I think is good news for the taxpayer, is that I chaired Ways and Means for 4 years, and people think of it simply as this all-powerful role. And it is. And I mean, it had me 1 inch from the Senate presidency, and it's unfortunate that didn't work, but it's a PhD in government, as Charlie Baker said to me at the time when he was Secretary of A&F. And what does that mean? It teaches you why the taxpayer is so frustrated. What I found, and not every chair probably comes to this conclusion, what I found is that when people argue every time there's a downturn, we've cut through the fat and we're into the bone. No, we're not. Government is inefficient, and the best you can do is fight to make it more efficient. Mm-hmm. I did an exercise once in the budget, since you asked for budget speak, and I cut out all of the earmarks in the budget. That meant that there were 39 very pissed off people, including the Senate president at the time, who said, "What the hell are you doing?" And I said, well, a couple of things. I'm so frustrated by the garbage baked in here and the fact that people didn't even request these that I feel it's a way to do two things. One, figure out what is no longer necessary very quickly, since we're in dire straits here, coming into 9C cuts. And two, let the members appreciate the exercise we go through. Because I'm working 7 days a week while they're coming in from the cheap seats, and Mike Rodrigues has that difficult role now. I wouldn't want it now, but 4 years was wonderful because it taught me that the reason government is so inefficient and wasteful is because no one is charged with watching the dollar the way we watch it in our own home, because we can't stay in our home if we don't. So it was a great lesson for me. The second thing it did, though, Because remember, for those years, I was able to pour more money into, Barney Frank, once I can remember, marching in the Veterans Day parade with him. And he said, if we don't recapture the majority party, I'm unlikely to run. And it's yours to lose. At the time, I had, $1.5 million in the bank and had been looking for, some higher authority, if you will. He said, let me warn you, though. He said, I've watched what you've done in the last budget, and I'm paraphrasing. This is not a direct quote. And he basically said, you can get more done, and you have gotten more done as a chair of Ways and Means than a congressman in my seat might get done in 5 terms.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
Why is that good? Because it gave me the ability, and I'm going to use the state peer as an example, but you could easily pick something else, capital or operating, and it would be similar. It gave me the ability to know how to turn over every rock and find resources for my district, perhaps well beyond average, because only one person every 5 or 10 years chairs Ways and Means, right? I mean, it's I did 4 years. Mike Rodrigues is already in year 6. You know what I mean? So it's an uncommon role. And I don't think we've ever had somebody from the South Coast chair it before myself and now Mike.
Right.
So what happens, let me use the state pier. So in 2008, we look at this pier as grossly underutilized and mismanaged. There's a few little things happening. No one's paying what they should be, and no one's producing the job creation they should. Yep. So I write a law, but very similar to what I did with UMass when I did the Star Store. I didn't want to just build a building on campus. I could have done it for cheaper. Mm-hmm. I wanted to blossom the downtown, and in this case, the waterfront. And what I did was I wrote not just the $25 million bond, which they could have used to build a better parking lot and do some pier work and some fendering and some stuff that you might say is important, but it doesn't spark anything. Right. So I wrote what I call this vision language that said the money should be used to transform the pier into this mixed-use economic development project that included protecting the ferry. Because remember, it cost me tremendous political capital working with Fred Kalitz at the time to bring the ferry terminals here. George Leontine was instrumental in it. But the person who paid the political capital was me. Like when it's a state funding and a state law, right. The city and the federal government can squawk, they can help, they can hurt, they can add, they can subtract. But really at the end of the day, it's got to be a state rep or a state senator or a group that deliver. Unfortunately for me, I was at Ways and Means. The good news is I made it happen. I got us the vote and I got us the ferry terminal, but it cost me tremendously. It was used against me by one of the competitors for the Senate presidency, kind of like, look what he'll do, to take care of his own community. Right. Well, you're damn right, because before I'm the Senate president or Ways and Means chair, I'm the senator from this district, right. Born and raised, right. Staying, buried in a cemetery decades from now, hopefully. Right. So we put the language in that was transformative. And by the way, it's law. That's why I'm not talking about a whole lot of vision competing with everybody else saying they have a vision. This is not just my vision, it's my law. And It says that we keep existing resources. So it retains its commercial interest. It has to. There's very strict state laws on ports and sort of water dependent use that is developed in those ports. So we're mindful of all the things going on today, but we think it's grossly underutilized. It's mainly empty if you really look at it. Yeah. So this law says you got to protect the existing, but you can do all kinds of exciting things, like a restaurant, like a fish market, like retail, retain your ferries, enhance the ferry service. It's wonderful that you can get to Cuttyhunk and the Vineyard and Nantucket, but we want those people to stay on the pier and spend money, not just go to the Vineyard, Nantucket, and Cuttyhunk to spend all their money. Right. So I wrote the law. It's passed 3 times, signed by the governor. I had to go through conference because none of it was in the House side, which really what that means is you just have to negotiate twice. You got to work to get it through the Senate, and then it's easier when it's not conferenceable. And there are many things that the House and I, when I say the House, you have a House delegation in my district, and then there's one senator from the district with 5 House members. We frequently agree and deliver together. And sometimes we just support each other's priority. So something goes through on one branch or the other. It just makes it more difficult sometimes when there's that dynamic. For the pier, the reason why I was frustrated for so long was threefold. One, how inept the structure, like the fact that the government put the Department of Conservation and Recreation in charge of pier development is a sign of government ineptness. Yep. And that's no criticism of them. They didn't belong in charge. It's like if you give your keys to your 8-year-old son,
right?
And he
Don't blame him.
car up.
Right?
Who do you blame?
Right.
So the second part is just how long. So it's been law. Why does it take so long to implement? And the third part was that it was just difficult because there was strong opposition in the other branch to my original initiatives. But now we're all in agreement for the most part. And particularly we're in agreement that we want the highest and best use down there and that we want to ensure a public process, which is why I'm so excited about BSM hosting an open forum. And anybody who doesn't participate, as I said, I have a commitment from one just because I happened to be meeting on his project yesterday. Right. Anybody who doesn't agree to participate in the public process, I will publicly say shouldn't really be taking over a state resource. They're going to have a long-term lease on this. So we better make sure we get it right and maximize the economic development. Because remember, it's a state pier, it's state money, it's state law. The vision is now codified in state law, and we are accountable as state elected officials back to our voters.
We're speaking with Senator Mark Montigny about the state pier and the project there and how the bids are coming to a close. So soon we'll know who is going to take it over and what their vision is going to be. And we'll learn all about it here at WBSM. But stick around, folks. We'll be right back.
Now,
I can hear the couple fighting right next door. Their angry words sound clear through these thin walls. Around midnight I heard them shout, unfaithful one. And I knew right then the axe was gonna fall. It's because...
Welcome back to the program. I'm Chris McCarthy. I want to point out a sponsor of mine, SouthCoast and Associates. It's a full-time, full-service construction management and design consulting firm. They've sat right in here in the studio going over different projects they've worked on and permitting issues they've had. They specialize in residential and commercial projects of any size. They have extensive knowledge of the best and the latest products, techniques, and building code requirements. SouthCoast and Associates continually exceeds client expectations. I can tell you that because I've spoken with some of the clients. They're really happy with the service they get from SouthCoast and Associates. They offer creative solutions for countless projects throughout Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And along the way, they've developed a long-standing series of relationships with local municipalities, trades, people, and clientele. Contact them today and find out why they offer the most complete and successful build experience in the area. SouthCoast and Associates, the number's very easy. It's 774-202-4868. SouthCoast and Associates, I know you'll have a great experience with them. Give them a call. So, Senator Montigny and I are speaking about the state pier and the fact that the senator has secured funding, tens of millions of dollars, for the greater New Bedford area. It'll benefit New Bedford and Fairhaven, the waterfront area here. It will be not just state money. It will be the state money will be leveraged to allow continuing private funds in there. What do you anticipate, Mark, the private funding component of this development will be?
So if you think about, again, I'll use downtown as an example. Try to look back prior to my Star Store legislation. Empty buildings, second and third floor empty, not much going on. Ironically, it was the young generation, the skateboarders and the kids going to the Whalen Museum that started to open the no problemos, et cetera. But if we hadn't spent the state money, and it wasn't just Star Store, that was expensive. It was seeding all the arts organizations. The state representatives and I earmarked millions. All that streetscape work, that's not city funding, that's state funding.
Right.
The tax credits for all the housing projects going on, almost all state funding. Very little federal. Local communities can't afford it. The property taxes would be higher even than what they are.
Right.
So our intention wasn't just to spend taxpayer dollars. It was to, and this is where we joked earlier, but more than half true, if it didn't work, you lose your job as a public official.
Of course you would.
So what work means is the downtown turned into this fabulous arts and cultural center.
Because back then we still had a newspaper. They would have done an expose and that would have been into you.
Like it was, White Elephant is what I think Peter Cressy called it at the time. And I said, well, Peter, I'm not building it on your campus. I'm building it here.
Right.
When I say I'm the proxy for the taxpayer. Ain't my money, but I watch it like it is.
Right.
So the key is that if it didn't change the image, we'd be in trouble. But if it didn't bring in the private investment, we would have failed, because that's where the jobs come from. So if you look at downtown now, almost every building full, cranes in construction, hundreds of people living there by choice that didn't used to live there. You used to get a voucher and told, go live downtown.
Right.
Now, you fight to live downtown. I live close by. I can walk, but I wish I long ago had bought a building, because I'd be living there.
Right.
And so when I look at the pier, even in anticipation, remember that I did this law long ago and spread that vision through the media. Even the anticipation of that state investment has created, like you wouldn't have the investment in the restaurant or the hotel if people didn't anticipate more and more tourists and residents coming there.
Correct.
Once the state pier is done, that's not all the work that needs to be done. There's all kinds of things going on the city pier, dredging in the harbor, north of the bridge. But the state pier is singularly the biggest open asset that will attract people. When people come, investors can make money, whether it's running a restaurant, whether it's having a fish market, whether it's running a ferry service, whether it's looking for qualified workers in your cold storage, in your transportation business connected to what's going on in wind.
And you know what it's fair to say? It is
100% of the wind investment and legislation and pier work, 100% through the state legislature, 100%, over $100 million
into all the development down.
That's right.
Right.
And what is happening now?
It all came from the state legislature.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
And we've got a really strong delegation that works together. We don't always agree.
Right.
We fight like hell.
Right.
But you wouldn't have, and some of it is, we can't take all the credit because we have the natural assets. Like if we didn't have a harbor with a state pier, I wouldn't be able to deliver that vision and that money. If we didn't have the right place for wind energy, the state reps and I wouldn't have been able to pass a law and build a pier and attract the kind of investment. But what it takes is having those natural resources. We're so lucky in New Bedford to be on Buzzards Bay, to have a working waterfront protected by a hurricane dike, to have an empty pier ready for development, to have the best location. Like I met the other day with one of the wind companies because I have deep concerns about them not working closely enough with the fishing industry. And they're going to continue to be criticized by me and others if they do not. And I'm pro-wind. I'm a supporter of the concept, although I have a lot of concerns. When Barron's has a front page story about the failures in wind because of politicians, you have to at least be mindful that ratepayers inherit what happens in any energy source. So I am a supporter but a healthy skeptic in how the finances work out. I'm a numbers guy, as we discussed when we talked about Steward. So I pay attention to the finances, but I also pay attention to you do not injure or kill the goose that lays the golden egg. And the fishing industry is the most lucrative in the country. And even when they create some new source of energy that makes wind look old, I still have a feeling that our fishing industry will be keeping New Bedford lucrative. So I was in this meeting with some strong criticism, but also to listen to their numbers. And that's an example, like talking about this pier. It's an example of state investment first incentivizes the private sector. I'm only for that where there's this but-for thing, they used to call it in some of the old federal programs. But for this investment, it wouldn't happen. I'm not in favor of dumping taxpayer money into the biotech industry and all this other crap that's going to come out in the economic development bill, unfortunately, that the governor will file. I'm in favor of doing things that the private sector needs to be incentivized to do to leverage private investment, not taking money from personal taxpayers and putting it on the balance sheet or income statement of commercial taxpayers.
Mark, you brought up Stewart. Just to take an aside on that, I see that over the weekend the governor, she got some response but not enough response from Stewart.
Well, yeah, I mean they're crooks. We should not do business at all with current management. Ralph DeLatorre should be fired.
You've been talking about him.
Yeah.
McGrory wrote a piece about him in the Globe about his yachts and all of this stuff. I mean, it's outrageous.
McGrory and I could compete for who's more outrageous. Right? It's outrageous. If there's any bailout without stripping the current management, without criminal and civil investigations, I will vote against it. Even if there are consequences in my own hometown of criticism. Now, when I say vote against it, it's likely to be a protest vote. I am obviously very, very careful if I'm a swing vote or in a key position as a committee chair on something, but this has to stop. People are dissatisfied with their health care. They're overpaying for it. They're underserved. And Stewart's just the most egregious example.
Right.
Nobody's calling me to tell me how happy they are with their health care. And please do today. Make sure you call me and make sure you leave your name so I can call you back and find out your secret sauce.
Right. What is the way out of this thing? Do we know yet?
I don't know. I mean, my feeling is that I'm obviously waiting. I mean, the governor controls the regulatory bodies, not me. So I'm waiting and hoping. But the reason I've spent my energy lately,
but you're meeting with, for instance, SouthCoast Hospital on this.
Yeah. I mean, I told you I spent an hour and a half. It was they did a Zoom or Teams meeting on Friday. And I was sitting in the AT&T parking lot over here in the North End, and because I was going in to get a new iPad, and I was so fixated on this issue that normally I would just say, "Look, my staff's on the call, we're fine."
Right.
But this is too urgent. We had a really interesting meeting about South Coast and just the impacts it's having. So,
yeah.
But back on the pier and leverage, I think that we should spend more time, and we don't do enough in government bodies, thinking of how we can apply resources to leverage that private investment. If you look at the concept of buy low, sell high, one of the things that makes New Bedford such an incredible, investable place is that it is still relatively inexpensive. Mm-hmm. Not if you're struggling and trying to pay your rent, by the way. I'm talking about relatively, key word. I think that, as you know, one of the longest time efforts I put in was on commuter rail. I mean, I wrote a lot of the early bonding and language, and worked with the state reps on and Governor Baker on this. It's now, I spent 10 years not cheerleading. I would not come on this show.
Mark, talk about for a second the jobs that are available to, if they're interested in working on the railroad. Those jobs are unbelievable.
Well, and you have been pointing it out.
Right.
Consistently, and we even have something that we're going to work on together to bring that home locally. But ironically, they can't find the skilled people in Boston because the cost of living is too expensive to enjoy the salary that they pay.
Right.
We don't have that problem here. Our cost of living has gone up exponentially, and it's scary and troubling. But if you take those salaries from those jobs that will come and apply them to New Bedford cost of living, people will do well.
Absolutely.
And we've got the skilled people to do it. But the irony is, people might not realize this, I was the person, there's a famous quote that Bill Weld in 1997 said, sue me if you don't, 1991, he said, sue me if you don't have commuter rail by 1997. And then there was a comma there, and then it was Montigny, period. Why? Because I was introducing him to the Fall River Chamber of Commerce. I was not even in the Senate yet.
All right.
And I had already gone to the Fall River senator at the time to push for a $200,000 earmark, Tom Norton, for a $200,000 earmark to study you have to do the environmental impact. And then I got elected a couple of years later and went in and sat with the Secretary of Transportation. And he said, well, are you interested in the Middleborough line or the Stoughton line? I said, I'm interested in getting off I almost said it, you would have to bleep me, getting off our butts. So how much do you need? He told me I earmarked double so we could study both lines, and of course favored the Stoughton line, which would be much quicker, but that's for another day. I then spent, you talk about political capital, a tremendous amount of political capital because I chaired Ways and Means. So I put through all of the early bonding and authorizations, even a design build piece to expedite South of Cotley Junction. And nothing got done because all the governors were taking credit and doing nothing.
Right.
Weld, Salucci, Swift, Deval Patrick came to a Whaling Museum event and held a press conference. I was there with him. And I remember one of the reporters coming up after and said, you've done most of the early work on this. Why weren't you cheerleading today? I said, because I'm sick and tired of cheerleading and then having to answer to my constituents that it hasn't come. And at the time, SouthCoast Magazine had a picture of me on the cover with my arms outstretched saying, where's the train?
Right.
That's 20 years ago. It's
right.
like, give me a break. So the reason I wasn't cheerleading, we still were working hard on it, but I wasn't cheerleading because I didn't have any faith that was going to get done in that gubernatorial tenure. I didn't. I listened to the governor. I listened to his press conference. I met with him. Didn't have any faith. And the first guy who came in and said, I made a commitment. And remember, he was initially opposed to it.
He was.
Baker. He came in and he followed through on that commitment. And I'll always be thankful to him, even though we have to be very mindful of the unintended consequences.
Yes.
I was talking to a friend of mine from Brooklyn one day when I was in Brooklyn, which I love New York. It's too expensive, and I wouldn't want to live there now, but I look at how they've gentrified Brooklyn. And I was talking to him about how unique New Bedford is and how much I've worked on the downtown. And we talked about the pier, we talked about the train. And I said, I've spent my entire career. Well, what did I do before I ran? I was president of a chamber of commerce. I was the director of economic development. I've always been trying to strengthen the community and create jobs and do economic development. But now I get to an age, and we've gotten to a development stage
right.
where I'm deeply concerned and constantly for over the last 10 years reminding people you have to build in things to preserve the quality and the culture here. Like the last thing you want to do is push out why everybody loves this place.
Right.
I want to live here until I'm not alive anymore. I hope
right.
a long time from now. That's
right.
twice today. I'm not trying to give you any news.
So the reality of it is that the train is going to roll into town. They are looking for people.
I
Those
think
jobs are unbelievable.
Yep. I think there's tremendous potential.
I've known some people. That's the reason I said I know some guys. I met them over the years who worked at the train, and it is life-changing money.
For sure. Especially if you don't have to pay for the Boston living.
Right.
Not that it's cheap anymore for people that are struggling. A lot of my friends, a lot of people I know personally, constituents, I'm hearing from them on exponential rent increases. But if you're making that salary that's based on a Boston cost of living, where ironically they're struggling on that salary, here you're doing well. So there will be very lucrative jobs for New Bedford people.
And that payroll is the kind of payroll this area has been hurting for years.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, it is the kind of payroll where not only does the person who gets the job change, but so does all the people he does business with, right? And all those payroll. The payroll is going to be so big, so many people. It's going to have a bonus.
And as you know, once it comes in, both because of the enhancing of the payroll, but also just the connection to the commercial capital of the world, and especially post-pandemic when people realize virtual work can be done by many. Yeah. New Bedford becomes a very lucrative commercial place to do business, which helps build the tax base. Yeah. Because most of us, including me, don't want to pay New Bedford property taxes.
It's crazy.
It is. But the number one way to diminish that, one, you bring home state resources every chance, like education. I mean, imagine what they'd be if we weren't paying for economic development.
Would you just tell people for a second what they'd be?
Yeah, I mean, I
can't imagine what the taxes in this region would be, New Bedford particularly, if they had to pay for those schools.
The people like me who live here, and we wouldn't be able to live here. They would be double or more, like just from education funding.
Right.
And that's why the state reps and I fight so hard. I mean, when I sit and I talk to Tony Cabral and Paul Schmid and Chris Markey and Chris Hendricks, it's the number one thing that comes up. Like, we care about economic development, we care about healthcare, but if, not only is education the future of our children, it's the current survival of people paying property taxes.
Right, because, folks, I know you all complain about your property tax, and I hear you, and you have every right in the world to, but if you had to pay for your schools in New Bedford, if Senator Montigny and the reps weren't doing it for you, it would be incredible. It would be impossible.
And the only other way to diminish it is to continue to develop the commercial base. Yeah. You hope, for instance, when you develop the pier, you talk about you build it, they will come again, and the leverage, all of those private interests will pay property taxes in the millions. That helps. And then it's easier to demand relief, because that's what I'm hearing from people on your show and when they call. Absolutely. I'm not in charge of that department, but I am in charge of trying to bring as much economic development and educational resources as I can here.
We have talked with you for over a month now about the new potential for taxes on the local level as envisioned by the governor.
So I just want to state again, because sometimes a listener who might have been on a month ago wasn't on today. I have looked through a lot of the plan. I've listened to the governor. I've listened to the Mass Municipal Association, and I've read a lot of the comments from local officials, including in this region. And I want to state again unequivocally, I will do everything I can to fight against an increase in the excise tax. I'm hugely skeptical about any change to hotel and restaurant. The only reason I'll even entertain it, one, because you have to keep an open mind when a bill hasn't even had a hearing. Let me start there.
Of course.
But two, there are times when I'll consider, for instance, the hotel tax, because it's paid for by people coming in. So we're importing their dollars to use to bring down our property taxes. So especially if the local communities, the selectmen and the mayor and the city council, if they can show me this is what we're doing with the money, not that it's going into just a pit,
right,
but that we are going to offset this, or we're going to do a special program that saves people on that, I'm open to it. But as of now, my default is anything that takes power from the legislature. Remember, we are elected as the proxy to go to Boston and do all the things I've spent the last hour and a half telling you I'm doing. There's no reason that we would diminish the power vested in us by the taxpayer and the voter. So the default is no. On the other hand, anything that makes it easier for local communities to operate, there's all kinds of things in there that I will give a likely yes to.
Sure.
The public hearing process helps us figure that out. But the notion that we should just pass local taxes because we're only giving them the authority and they might never take it up, that's just not how I legislate.
Right.
Because a year or 2 or 3 or 5 from now, I don't want to hear from a person that said, you were supposed to be watching out for us, and now Community X did, this fancy move. So I would rather, when I'm charged with it, I don't have a right to tell a select man or a select woman or a city council or a mayor what to do. I can suggest if I can be helpful, but I stay out of their way. But I also do my job and don't really take lightly when they tell me how to do it. Excise tax, dead on arrival.
Good.
And I don't see anybody saying up there, yeah, let's do that.
And the real estate transfer tax?
I think dead on arrival too. I mean, I want to come back at you when I see I know how to count votes.
Of course.
And it's too early now because we haven't even had a public hearing process. But I don't see anybody jumping up and down. I mean, maybe if the people from Brookline and Newton want to do it, let them.
Right. She is the governor. She got elected overwhelmingly, and she's going to get some priorities.
Sure, and she should.
She should. I agree with that. But taxing people more is just...
It's not going to happen. I just think, again, there is no appetite. I'm not saying there
we
won't
need
be some
cars
people.
here.
There's some people that are more money always.
Right.
Because they're not realistic about who is paying. I represent a district that tells me they're struggling. I believe them because I'm here every day. I understand that struggle.
Right.
And I'm not struggling personally. And I don't try to hide behind it. I've said to you on the show before, I didn't take a vow of poverty.
Right.
Now that I have a 9-year-old son, I realize the reality of where your retirement plans you think they are.
Right.
But there are people I represent, and I take very seriously that are struggling more than I am, and it's my job to worry about them.
And the
by
idea
way,
that you're going to raise...
family where every week we had to, balance things.
Sure.
I didn't ever feel poor because my mom and dad kept things so wonderful in our home and made us feel so enriched with love and with comfort. So I never felt poor.
Right.
But I certainly realized in hindsight we weren't rich.
Right. And the idea that because everyone here needs their cars to move around, and the idea that they might triple your auto excise tax and then take your license if you can't pay it.
And that's why
right?
the fact...
When you read that bill, the enforcement mechanisms...
And you wonder...
It's like something out of Robin Hood.
You wonder where the person came from that sat there and wrote it and said that's okay.
Right.
They didn't come from my community,
right.
and they didn't come from my family, and they didn't come from my circle of friends.
Right.
When I look at that punitive enforcement mechanism, first of all, if you really wanted to give communities the right to do this, and I think it's stupid and we shouldn't,
right.
I've said it that clearly, but if you really felt strongly about that, then at least don't have somebody with 10 ears writing it.
Right.
Like, make it clear that no one is going to lose their license
right.
over this.
Right.
That, yes, we will tack on interest or do whatever they do.
Right.
But the fact that they would take somebody struggling, who might even be sleeping in their car, by the way.
Absolutely, Mark.
But
right.
let's even go above that. Let's even say we're not here to pull heartstrings on those that are really, really on the edge. Let's just talk about the average working class, middle class, I hate the word class, the average person who week to week is worrying about their budget, and you say, we need more money, and you better pay it because we'll take your...
Yes, don't say it, but your driver's
license away.
Folks, stick around. We'll be right back.
Now.
Nobody on the road, nobody on the beach. I feel it in the air.
The reason they're not on the road is they failed to take their car to Mac Auto Sales and get it serviced. 188 Rivet Street, New Bedford. They repair all makes and models of cars. Call Mac Auto Sales and Repair. I recommend them. I told you we bring Natalie's BMW to them. They repair all foreign cars, but they also take care of domestic cars as well. Give them a call, 508-565-6221. Conveniently open weekdays 9 to 5. If you have any kind of car, foreign or domestic, but they do specialize in foreign, bring them down there. Also, if you're in the market for a beautifully used car, ask about their aftermarket accessories and quality used cars. Tell them Chris McCarthy sent you, Mac Auto Sales in New Bedford. So, Senator Montigny, before you leave, you have a great day. We really appreciate you coming and spending all this time with us.
I love doing it, Chris.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you making yourself available, and I appreciate that you're incorporating this program, this radio station, into the announcement. So go over that one more time.
Well, I can't think of a better way. I mean, I was trying to think of how frustrated. Remember that there have been disagreements with some of the state reps and I on this legislation. As I mentioned, all of the initial law and bonding came through the Senate with some opposition, and that's okay, because that's like what we do for a living. Like,
right.
I don't always agree with the state rep team, and they don't always agree with me. But one thing we strongly agree on is that this should maximize job creation. It should maximize the footprint down there by fully protecting the current folks in the commercial fishing industry, in freight, in cold storage, in ferry. There's a lot of stuff going on. We just don't think it's enough for a property that big on the waterfront. And the one thing the state reps and I are in 100% agreement on is that there wasn't a good public process, and that's why this RFP needed to be reissued, and this time we don't want to make a mistake. I can't think of a better way than having them come in here on the hot seat, discuss how they're going to help New Bedford, not just their income statement and balance sheet, or not just how they're going to take advantage of the state resources that we will apply, including my existing multi-million-dollar bond that's law. Let them answer your questions. And maybe I'll even come in here and pose a few of my own.
That would be
those
wonderful.
days. But we have a commitment from one already. my assumption will be when they release to us everyone that has bid, I will put all of them on notice that they should participate in a public process starting, not the finish, but starting with your show on BSM. Why not?
Right. No, I appreciate it, Mark. I know my audience appreciates it. This is the best way to reach everybody.
I mean, and people can listen if they choose to, or they can go to the podcast.
Right.
Because I think we'll get relevant information. People should be held accountable. They should publicly state why they are bidding and why their bid is better than the next person.
Because this is a community-owned resource, and you're directing it. Or through. Well,
we're lucky we have the resource. I mean, I love doing it. Even when you and I disagree. I mean, today was like kind of an easy day because we agreed on a lot of things. Right. But I find, as I said, I mentioned that caller the other day that I saw downtown, and it's like I almost never, even from people who strongly disagree with me, they always appreciate that you put out there the debate, because at the end of the day, you can't put up your finger and see which way the wind's blowing in my job. I represent all the towns in the area and the city. It's a lot of people. It's close to 200,000. Right. And I can't please them all every day, but I damn well better be pleasing more than I'm not over time.
Right.
So if you communicate where you stand, even when people completely disagree, they know that the next day I'm fighting to get
and
resources.
Legislation is a bargain.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, legislation is a compromise, no matter what.
Unless you're a dictator,
right,
benevolent or not, it's a tough process. Like we were saying earlier, I mean, if you think about the founding fathers and remember that the Massachusetts Constitution is an old thing,
right?
Lawmaking is designed to be really painful, and I am very frustrated by that. I'll give you an example as we close, Chris. I had an interview with the Globe this week. And actually I have another one this week on Steward, which is similar. But the interview with the Globe was on my anti-human trafficking efforts. And I read them the timeline on how many times I have filed a bill or it passed the Senate and died somewhere else and how frustrating it is. That's the bad news, right?
Yep.
The good news is that if it wasn't difficult to make law, you think your taxes are high now, you wouldn't believe some of the zany ideas that people come to Beacon Hill with.
Right.
And look at, Washington. From both extremes in the party. I mean, the number one thing that corrupts public policy in both parties is special interests. They fund campaigns, not mine, by the way. They fund both sides, and both sides just happen to have different special interests. Right. And that's why, at the end of the day, people are so frustrated with parties.
Mark, I want to thank you for coming in. Drive safe. Senator Montigny, we'll see you again soon. Really appreciate you again bringing my show into this public process.
Great to be with your royal listeners. Not loyal, I said royal.
Royal listeners. All right, folks, stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the program. I'm Chris McCarthy. Again, I want to thank Senator Montigny for coming in and spending an hour with me. Actually, more than an hour. Going over the State Pier project. I mean, it's a really exciting project. And the fact that he's already working with developers to come and do their unveils here on this program in front of you, the public, so that we'll have an input. I mean, again, this is a public resource, public money, taxpayers, the residents of the city of New Bedford and Fairhaven. I mean, I'm very excited for it, and hopefully it's a model for more of that, right? More transparency, more accountability, and giving you and me more of a role in the process. So I'm excited for it. And again, that comes out of the head of Senator Montigny. He's the fountainhead on this. Now, folks, in the next hour, of course, as usual, we'll have Mayor John Mitchell here in studio talking about some of the great stuff that's going on in the city of New Bedford, his ideas, his plans. And as we come into budget season, so Mayor Mitchell will be here in the studio taking your calls, 508-996-0500. That's how you can get on the program. We have the local news coming up. Now, as I've always given you a strategy, if you'd like to get through to the mayor, the best way to do it is to call during the news and get on hold. That way you queue up and when the mayor comes. But again, folks, out of the interest of your neighbors, other callers, if you keep the preamble to a minimum, ask the question. Ask him the question and then he'll answer it. And that'll get the most callers through. I think that makes it the best way. Because normally what ends up happening is that we leave a couple of people on hold. And I never like that, to leave people on hold, if I can help it. Sometimes there's nothing we can do about it. But again, you can be a better neighbor, better person. If you just keep the preamble to a minimum, you're not going to get a Perry Mason out of John Mitchell anyway. He's a pretty smart guy, right? All right, folks, stick around for the local news and the national news. I'm Chris McCarthy. We'll be right back.